Okay, so this is our Geometry Unit 6 and Unit 7 assessment review. Let's get started. On question number 1, they ask us, what is the measure of arc RT in the figure below? Well, the first thing is they give me is a rectangle inside of a circle, and they tell me that arc QR is 60 degrees. But if you remember, we said that if a chord is congruent to another chord, then the arc that that chords make will also be congruent to the other arc. So if segment QR is congruent to segment ST, okay, and it is because we have a rectangle here, well then this arc right here, which is 60 degrees, is going to be congruent to this arc right here, which will also be 60 degrees. So we know that. On top of that, we also know that a circle has 360 degrees. So if I have 360 degrees in a circle, and I used up 60 here and 60 here, that's 360 minus 120. 60 plus 60 is 120. So 360 minus the 120 leaves me with 240 degrees that I need to divvy up on the two sides here. Now obviously these two chords, or these two sides of the rectangle are congruent. So these chords, because they are chords in the circle, are also congruent, which means that this arc here and this arc here are also going to be congruent. So those 240 degrees that I have left over, I have to divide them by 2, which gives me 120 degrees, 120 and 120. And if you add up all of these together, 60 plus 120, that gives you 180, plus another 60, plus another 120, you get the 360 degrees that you should have in every circle. So the measure of arc RT is 120 degrees, which is choice D. Number 2, we have two chords that intersect inside the circle. They want to know what is the measure of X right here. Remember that we said that the product of the two parts of any chord are equal to the product of another chord when they intersect inside the circle, meaning that this chord right here, if I say 6 times X, it's going to be equal to the product of the parts of this chord here, which is 5 times 12. So 6 times X is 6X, 5 times 12 is 60, so 6X is equal to 60, and after that it's pretty simple. We just divide both sides by 6, and X comes out to be 10, which is choice letter A. But you got to remember that when you have your chords intersecting inside your circle, you have to multiply the two parts of them together and set them equal to the product of the other two parts together. Question number 3. They give us an equation of a circle, and they ask us to match it up with one of the charts that they show us, right? Well, if you remember here, in an equation of a circle, we said that the quick shortcut is that whatever the number is inside the equation, it's the opposite when it's at the center of a circle. So if the x is -2 here, that means that the actual center is going to be +2. And if the x is +4 in the formula, it's going to be -4 at the center. So right away, if you remember that rule or that trick, right away we know that the choices are going to be either A or B. Right away, it can't be C or D, because if here my coordinates are 2, -4, that's 2 to the right and 4 down, or 2 to the right and 4 down. So it's either A or B. Now the question becomes, well, how big is my radius, right? Well, remember we said that the equation of a circle comes from the distance formula, but except that they got rid of the radical sign here, right? But in order to get rid of that, we had to square both sides of the equation. So this 4 was originally squared, which means that the radius is 2, because 2 squared is 4. Or what we can say here is that we took the square root of both sides, and the square root of 4 is 2. So my radius is going to be 2. And if you look here, this radius is 1, 2, 3, 4 units. That's too big. But if you look over here, this radius is 1 and 2. So that's why the answer is choice B. Not A, it's B. If you picked anything other than A and B, then I would recommend you go back and look at the equations that we did in class, or some other videos where we explain the rules for the formula. Remember that if it's negative in here, it's going to be positive in the center of the circle. And if it's positive here, it's going to be negative in the center of the circle. They're opposites. The equation and the center are opposites because of that negative sign that's inherent to the formula. Let's take a look at number 4. Number 4, they give me a picture of a Ferris wheel. They tell me that the radius is 15 feet. They want me to find the distance from seat 6 to seat 1. So naturally, if I'm dealing with this part of the circle, I hope you realized that you're dealing with the circumference of the circle. And the formula for the circumference is 2 times pi times r. So I can find the whole circumference of this circle. So 2 times pi times r is 2 times pi times a radius of 15, and I get 94.2 feet. So the entire distance around this circle is 94.2 feet. Now, by the way, notice that's one of the choices, right? That's choice D. Now, the question is not asking me for the circumference of the circle. The question is asking me for the distance from seat 6 to seat 1. And they also tell me that this arc right here, right, says the arc makes up 1/4, right? So this arc right here is 1/4 of the Ferris wheel. Well, I don't want the whole Ferris wheel. I just want this 1/4 part here, right? So if I take 94.2 and divide it by 4, because I want 1/4 of it, that's going to give me 23.55, which means that my answer is going to be choice A. I can round that up to 24. But notice how 94 was one of your choices. That's because they expected you to stop at the circumference. But you got to answer the question. The question is asking you for this arc here, which is 1/4. This amount divided by 4 gives you the answer. Question number 5. Again, we're dealing with an equation of a circle. Here, they show me the circle, they give me my center, and they show me the radius. Well, what are the coordinates of the center here? Well, here's my origin. So I go 2 units to the right. So my x value is 2. And then I don't go up or down. So my y value stays at 0. So right away, if my center is at positive 2, I know that inside my formula of an equation of a circle, it's going to be a negative 2. So do I see any x's that and any negative 2's together? Well, it's not going to be A and it's not going to be B. So naturally, it's going to be choice C or D. I have my x values, and they both have to be, it's got to be a negative 2. Because it's positive in here, that means in the formula, it's the opposite. So it's going to be either choice C or D. Look at my y value. My y value is 0. That means that I'm not going to have any number next to my y. I don't have any numbers here next to my y, which is also why it's C and D. And finally, when I measure the radius, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 units. So my radius is 8. But you got to remember that in the formula, the radius is squared. It's squared, so if it's 8 here, in my formula, it's going to be 64. That's why the answer is choice D. And by the way, remember, in the formula, it's squared, right? So if it's 64, then the radius is going to be the square root of that, which is 8. You got to remember that. Number 6. Again, we have the exact same type of question. They're telling me that the center of the circle is at -4 and positive 1.6. So I know that the x value is going to be positive 4, and the y value is going to be negative because they're opposites. So here's a -4. Do I see any x values of positive 4? Yep, it's here C and D. My y is positive 1.6, so in the formula it's going to be negative. Again, it's C and D. They tell me that the radius is 7, and you got to remember that in the formula the radius is squared. So 7 squared is 49, and that's why it's choice D. Let's move on to number 7. Question number 7, they give me a pie, and they tell me that the radius of the pie is 6 inches, and they tell me that the area of the slice of pie is 60 degrees, and they want to know what is the area of this pie. Well, then when you look at all your choices, you know that all your choices are in terms of pi. Remember we talked about that? Well, let's get back to solving the problem. Well, first of all, I'm dealing with area here. So I'm going to deal with the formula for the area of a circle, which is pi times r squared. So it's going to be pi times the radius, which is 6 squared, which is 36 pi, and my area is 36 pi. So the entire area of this circle is 36 pi. But I don't want the entire area of the circle. All I want is just the area of this little slice right here. Well, I know that a circle has 360 degrees. So if I take the 360 that I'm supposed to have, and I divide it by 60, I know that I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slices. So if the entire pie is 36 pi, and I have 6 slices, and all I want is 1 slice, well, I can take 36 pi and divide it by 6, which is going to give me 6 pi. So each one of these slices are all going to be 6 pi. And if I add up all the 6 pies, I get 36 pi, which is why my answer is choice B. Let's move on to question number 8. Question number 8, again, they give us an equation of a circle. In my equation, my x is negative and my y is positive. That means that at the center of the circle, they're going to be opposites. So my x has to be positive 5. So where is a positive 5? B has a positive 5 and D has a positive 5. My y is a positive 1, so I know that in the center it's going to be negative. B has a negative 1 and D has a negative 1. And finally, my radius here, which is 9, has already been squared, which means that the real radius